The U.S. drug maker's vaccine has so far only been used in the country to inoculate medical staff. Now, to understand what the approval means for the mass vaccination rollout, I'm now joined by Dr. Aslam Dasoo, the convener of the Progressive Health Forum. Dr. Dasoo, good afternoon and thank you very much for your time. The vaccine has now been registered in terms of Section 15, subsection 6A. What does that actually mean in practical terms?
Good afternoon, Tommy. Well, I think first off, let's be grateful that we've actually reached this point. It's a very important step in the whole process of the vaccine rollout. Our regulator has to be certain that the vaccine is safe and is efficacious for what we're trying to do. They've approved its use under an emergency use authorization. The precise details in the Act will lay out what the limitations are of those. But to all intents and purposes, it's the green light for the mass rollout of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, at least.
You're saying it's a significant step in our fight. What does this authorization itself mean as far as, of course, the fight that we are all engaged in worldwide?
Sure. So, look, South Africa was actually the first to use the J&J vaccine while it was not yet authorized by any of the major regulators. So it was still under trial conditions, and people must have heard that the rollout that we have been seeing over the last few weeks or a month or so has been under trial conditions. It was required to be under those conditions so that certain observations can be made of it, and it has to be done under controlled circumstances. So what this does now is that it's no longer going to be rolled out under those trial conditions. It can be rolled out anywhere under the authority of the health authorities, and it can be done on a mass basis without the reporting requirements that the trial rollout necessitates.
Now, there are a number of conditions, of course, that come with this. The first one, and you'll tell me here what this means, that the supply and administration of this should be done with the National Department of Health. Does that mean that the private sector cannot by itself then acquire these vaccines and administer them? They have got to be done under the National Department of Health.
Yes, and I think, look, this is the requirement of the regulator. So the regulator needs to know who is bringing the vaccine in, who is acquiring it, and under what conditions it will be administered. So at this point, it looks like the government is the only acquirer of this vaccine, and no one else is able to acquire it, or if they are, they will need to register it as such with SAHPRA accordingly. Now, it's important that we understand that a sole procurer of vaccines is actually a limiting factor. In that, for example, in South Africa, because we are a bit behind in our vaccination program, as everyone understands, and leaving a sole procurer of this vaccine under conditions of great demand worldwide really limits our ability to bring in vaccine. However, the government has struck a deal with Johnson & Johnson for a batch of several million, the first of which will come in during April, we are told. The private sector, in my view, and any other agent, so for-profit private sector or non-profit private sector agencies who can legitimately acquire vaccine should be allowed to bring it in, because we can do with a whole lot more. Of course, it will come in under proper conditions. It will have to be registered. It will have to be noted how it's being rolled out. So there's no harm in that scenario. We have a national plan that we will first vaccinate health workers, then we will vaccinate at-risk populations, and then the broader population. And I think any other party beside the government bringing vaccine in will follow that particular protocol. But the important thing is that we'll be able to get more people vaccinated faster.
Yeah.
And that is really the important condition here.
Now, of course, SAPRA also put in the condition that it should be done with the COVID-19 vaccination plan as laid out by the Department of Health, as you put it, Dr. Dasoo. Does that mean South Africa should still be confident in that plan? Many are saying, well, look, you have missed targets now a number of times. For example, we were supposed to have vaccinated all the healthcare workers, 1.2 million of them, by the end of March. You've now moved that target to mid-April, but even the target is no longer 1.2 million, it's now 600,000. Many people losing hope in the vaccination plan that is laid out by the Department of Health.
Look, I think this is a problem of communication. The protocol for rolling out the broad vaccination program, as I indicated, would start with the health workers, then other essential frontline workers and at-risk population, and then the general. That is separate from the actual administration of the vaccine, which requires logistical and human resource expertise. At the moment, because the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was rolled out on a trial basis, it could only be used at trial sites. We only acquired 500,000 doses anyway. This was to replace the 1 million AstraZeneca doses that we had, but which proved to be less efficacious, and the government decided to put a pause on that. So the 500,000 single shot Johnson & Johnson replaces that. But it's only 500,000. As you pointed out, we have 1.25 million health workers registered. So we need more vaccine. So at this point, with this registration now, we can get much more of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, roll it out as planned to the rest of the health workers. The delay up to now, and you're quite right, we were supposed to have finished this by the end of March, has been because it had to be done under trial conditions. So I think with this registration, emergency use authorization, one is hopeful that the 1 million doses that have been promised by the department will land during this month. That will again continue the rollout to health workers until they are all vaccinated, and then the remainder and further doses coming in will be used for the next phase. So I think that's why I said at the outset, this is an important step. We have moved out of the trial phase now. We are now in the formal vaccination drive. The limiting factor is the amount of vaccine we can get in, and the second limiting factor is the efficiency of the actual rollout, getting it to everybody, utilizing all the private sector capability that we've got together with the public sector.
Yeah. Let's talk then about the vaccine itself. We know now that with this approval, it can be administered to those who are 18 years of age and above. So far, no severe side effects have been picked up that come at least from this vaccine. They are either mild or very none, actually. Let's talk then about why it's important to have periodic safety updates of this vaccine. Is there a chance of this vaccine maybe developing more severe side effects at a later stage?
Well, it's unlikely. And that is the reason why the trials are conducted across large numbers of people, to pick up the statistical probability of side effects. So that no major side effects have been picked up so far is a good indicator that none will be picked up into the future either. So I think on that basis we can be satisfied that we are dealing here with a safe vaccine. Of course, in a mass rollout, several things can go wrong. These vaccines come in multiple dose vials, and so drawing the exact amount per shot, needs to be very diligently followed. And if there's a mistake there, a person can get a lower dose rather than the correct dose, or a higher dose rather than correct dose. That might create some sort of side effect. Mostly, I think, if it's underdosed, you won't get sufficient immunity. But if it's overdosed, you might get more pronounced symptoms of the mild side effects that do occur. But we don't know about that. That is purely speculative. It needs to be precisely delivered, and if it is, there's absolutely nothing wrong with the safety profile of this vaccine.
Yeah. The other condition is, of course, that the rollout should be done conforming to the pharmacovigilance practices set out. Is that a normal practice with rollouts of this nature?
Yes, yes, very much so. And the emergency use authorization, that is actually an expedited registration. So there's no time allowed to actually put all the pharmacovigilance parameters in place before you start it out. We're in an emergency, and therefore the EUA, the Emergency Use Authorization, is important, but it will then have to be done together with the pharmacovigilance parameters that would have normally applied. And that's all that means.
Dr. Aslam, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon.